Hello, welcome to Passing the Torch, an online Bible study with your host and teacher, Bob Clark. Yeah, that's me. Today I'm excited to start off with the introduction to a new series of studies, not just a series of lessons, but a series of 8 studies that we're going to go through in this set of studies that I'm calling a Mosaic of Bible Prophecy. So today we're going to start off with study 1, which is an introduction to and summary of Bible prophecy. Today is lesson 1, which is basically an introduction to the introduction. So why are we calling this a mosaic of Bible prophecy? Well, a mosaic presents an image one tile at a time, effectively. When you're putting the tile on there, you're putting on one tile at a time. And it's really if you're putting in a piece here and a piece there, it's hard to see the entire image until the tile work is complete. With Bible prophecy, there's really no way to explain every little detail that is tile. Why not? Because we don't know every detail. It's still being revealed to us by the Holy Spirit as time progresses. And one of the things about it is when you're looking at a piece at a time, it's hard to get lost, or it's easy to get lost in all these little details. So we could teach it by event, the tribulation, or we could teach it by person, the Antichrist, or we could teach it by book, the book of Daniel. Well, so Dr. David Jeremiah, who's one of my favorite Bible and prophecy teachers, he's taught it all these different ways in trying to get the point across. So we're going to be doing the same thing or a similar thing, but we're going to do it in this one series of studies. So if you can see the screen, you start off with a blank slate on where you're planning on putting the tile. And you put on a piece at a time, sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, right? And as you put in more and more pieces, you see more and more of the picture. And when you're talking about Bible prophecy, the picture that you see at the end it's a picture of Jesus. So let me give credit here if you can see the screen. This is a painting by a young lady by the name of Akiana Kramerick. Hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So I encourage you to go online and see her story. It's pretty amazing. God gave her a vision of Jesus, and she went and painted it as a very, very young child. So, like I say, I want to give her credit for this. So as we go through this set of studies, it's going to be almost like painting a wall. You know how you paint a wall with a roller, and you go up and down across for a little bit, and get that first bit of paint on there, and then you come back and zigzag the other way, and eventually get the whole thing painted. Well, we're not going to get the whole thing painted because, as I say, we don't know all the details. We know a lot. We know a lot more than they did in the past because the Holy Spirit is revealing those things to us because we're closer to the end times. But what the idea of this image on the screen is pointing out is there'll be some areas that we miss, but there'll be a lot of areas where we cover multiple times. And the idea is the first time you hear it, it'll become familiar to you. And the next time, a little bit more so. And then finally, you will learn it. And hopefully in the end, you will learn it enough to be able to teach others. So in this first study, all right, not the first lesson, but the first study, we're going to be going through an introduction. That's what we're starting on today. Then we'll go into background, and then key timelines, and a summary of Bible prophecies. In this introduction, we'll be talking about today's lesson, the introduction to these studies, and I'm going to throw in here also the key teachers and sources and resources that I'm using for all of this. Not all of them, but the key ones. And then next time we'll talk about why study Bible prophecy, followed by what is Bible prophecy? Then Bible prophecy versus Nostradamus and psychics and all those kind of things. Because everybody sees things on TV and, oh, that must be real. Well, we're going to talk about that. After that, we'll go into background for studying Bible prophecy, which is a basis for understanding the prophecy, principles for understanding the prophecy, key terms, and differing interpretive approaches. Following that, we'll talk about key timelines. So I will almost always start with Genesis 3:15 because it gives the basis for the entire rest of the Bible. Then we'll go into Genesis 1. There's a timeline in Genesis 1? Absolutely. Then Daniel 9 is the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel. You may have heard that term. And then Matthew 24, where it talks about this generation shall not pass away. Well, what does that mean? We'll go into it. All right. And then eventually in this study, we'll get into a summary of Bible prophecies. And in that summary, we're going to review the traditional pre-tribulational rapture scenario, if you understand what those words mean. And I'll tell you up front, this is going to be taught from a pre-tribulation rapture, pre-millennial, pre-tribulation approach. All right? So we'll give here's the traditional approach. Then here's throwing in Islamic eschatology. And what we're going to find out is Christian eschatology. That's the end times Bible prophecy stuff. Christian Bible prophecy is like this. The Islamic it overlays it. The problem is they've reversed it, and all of the bad guys are the good guys, and the good guys are the bad guys. So we can see how this works together. Why study anything having to do with Islam? Because we start to understand the reasons behind some of the events in Bible prophecy, such as when Jesus comes back, why does the world fight against him? That has never made any sense to me. We will explain some of that, at least a good guess at it. Then finally, I have an untraditional speculation of the pre-trib rapture scenario. So it doesn't violate any of the rules of the Bible as far as I can tell. I've had multiple people look at it. But what it does is it gives a different perspective of maybe we don't know everything. And we typically have an idea of, well, Jesus could come today, but he's probably going to come a few years from now. And what I'm going to show is, no, he really could come today. So let's hope I get these studies done in a hurry. Before we go any further, what we're going to do in this whole set of studies, I want you to follow what the Bereans did in the book of Acts. So these, that is the Bereans, were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word, that is the word that Paul was preaching, with all readiness of mind. They were open to it. They were listening and searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so. So they listened to Paul. They were open to it, but they didn't take him totally at his word. They went and looked in the Bible for themselves. Okay? So we're going to start in this. I want you to start with two basic grounding points. One is what you currently believe. If you believe something about Bible prophecy, start there. All right? And we're going to start with the basis that the original text of the Bible is true. As the Bible says, it is God-breathed. All right? And it's true in the details. And it's in its precision. That is one of the key issues that we are going to get into here. That's what makes this work. All right? So be open to new teaching, but don't change your beliefs just because Bob says it. Don't change your beliefs unless there's evidence enough to change. Evaluate it by what the Bible says, not by opinions. And it just occurred to me something here. So there's some people that say, oh, it's pre-trib rapture, it's post-trib rapture, it's mid-trib rapture. There's all these different opinions, and all of them give great evidence, Bible evidence for those things. Okay. Could they all be correct? I'm going to leave you with that one for right now, but we will definitely come back to it. All right? So let's keep going. So the planned approach for this study, or rather these studies, the current plan is that this will be taught as a series of 8 studies. It won't surprise me if things get added to that. There'll be many lessons per each study. For instance, this introduction lesson, I just counted up, and if I don't change it, there's 15 lessons for this introduction study. 15 for an introduction, yeah, because of what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to be breaking things down into bite-sized chunks, and we want to dig into significant detail. Because the detail, the precision, that's where you really find out the things that are fun. That's where you find out if you're on the right track or not. There'll be occasional repeat of material, as I said just a little bit ago. The attempt, note that word, is to limit the lessons to about 30 minutes. But in reality, it's going to be maybe as short as 25 minutes, possibly, if I force myself, 20 minutes. But a lot of them will probably stretch out to 40, 45 minutes, just being honest with you up front. So if it's one of those kind of things, just stop the video when you have to get out of the car or whatever it is, and pick it up later. That's the way I do on a lot of preaching videos that I listen to. Also to note, the stopping point for any particular video may be decided in editing. I may break it apart in the editing, so it may look a little bit awkward. It is what it is. So, unlike other studies that I have done, this time I'm going to go ahead and chase the rabbit trails, if you understand what I mean. As the Spirit says, hey, here's an interesting idea to connect to this, I'm going to go ahead and lay those things down this time. And the lesson length, that's the reason why the lesson length is going to grow at times, right? But that's where we have a lot of fun and make a lot of connections. And we learn through those rabbit trails, as I call them. Other thing that's going to be different is there's going to be a lot more visual charts for the ease of understanding. A lot of maps, a lot of timelines, especially a lot of timelines, some photos, a number of other things like that. So it may not be when I first publish these things, but eventually I want to get a copy of my charts put in a place on my Google Dropbox, which will be passing the torch share folder, so that you can get a hold of it. And when I do that, I'll put a link in the YouTube description text, so you can get a hold of the charts if you want to, and go back and look at the images. All right. As I said, currently there's 8 studies planned with numerous lessons. And in the next few slides, so if you can see this slide, it goes through the title of each of the 8 lessons. But I'm about to go through in a little bit more detail each of the lessons in the next few slides. Another thing that I'm going to do is be flipping a lot more between my normal format with my picture on it and a full screen format. So I've got to get used to doing this. And hopefully in my getting used to it, I can learn to edit better in the editing part of this. So we've already went through study 1. The top levels is the introduction, background, key timelines, a summary of Bible prophecies. Study 2 is going to be a brief history of Israel. And in this brief history, it's already a lot of lessons. Because you have to understand Israel, the history of Israel, to understand Bible prophecy. So in this brief history of Israel, we'll have an introduction, which is actually, that's the only brief part of it, where we talk about why study Jewish history when the focus is end times prophecy. And then we'll talk about from creation to the Exodus. We'll talk about the settling of the nation of Israel to the exile. The next part will be the return that is from exile to the time of Jesus. And we'll talk some about what was it like when Jesus was around. And then we're going to go through 2,000 years of post-biblical Jewish history. And I've recently found some great teaching on that, and I'll borrow from some of that as I go. And then I want to close those set of lessons off with Christian observations of Jewish history. Because as I'm going through making charts for those lessons, I'm learning an awful lot. And I'm learning, I'll just put it like this for now. I'm learning how much God has allowed the Jewish people to go through for sake of the Gentiles learning who Jesus is. It's probably a good way to put it. So study 3 is world empires through the eyes of Daniel. And in this study about world empires, we're really going to teach through the book of Daniel and then have an extended section on the end of it. So we'll start off with an introduction to an overview of the book of Daniel and the person of Daniel. If you know about the book of Daniel, you realize the first 6 chapters, 12 chapters total, the first 6 chapters are really a story. It's a narrative portion of it. And that's where you got Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace and all those kind of things. The last 6 chapters, that's where he really gets into the prophetic portion. Chapter 2 is also prophetic, and really even the narrative pieces, they all go into prophecy somehow. Some of it's just veiled a little bit. And then once we go through the book of Daniel, we'll throw in here a summary of world empires, because there's more than just what the Bible says, but there's also some things that lead from what Daniel saw into the current times and rejoin in with what Daniel saw. And at the end of that, we'll have a set of lessons on putting it all together. The next set of lessons, and in study 4, is a panorama of church history. And we're using that, the basis of that is the letters to the 7 churches in Revelation. So there's debate among preachers and Bible teachers and such whether the letters to the 7 churches that are in Revelation chapter 2 or 3, whether they are prophetic or not about the church age. If you understand church history and you understand those letters, there's really not a lot of doubt about it. Those letters, in the order that they are, serve as a prophetic picture of the church age, from Jesus, his first coming to the second coming. And we're going to go through all of that. So we'll go through each one. We'll have an introduction, then go through each of the letters and talk about the church age that they represent. Then we'll have a post-study summary to pull all of that back around. In study 5, I've titled that, In the Words of Jesus and Others. Well, what is that talking about? So, if you're familiar, in Matthew 24, chapters 24 and 25, Mark chapter 13, and Luke chapter 21, those are what are referred to as the Olivet Discourse. And we're going to get into some of the precision that's going to sort of separate out Luke 21 as not exactly the Olivet Discourse, even though it covers some of the same material. So we'll start off talking about what did Jesus say about the tribulation, which is what he covered in those. And then I've thrown into this almost a catch-all study about the wars of Israel. And we'll talk about the modern wars from a prophetic standpoint. And we'll talk about Isaiah 11 and Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 and 39. You may be familiar with some of these. Then we'll talk about we'll go into judgment of other nations. So we'll go into Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and all of them have prophecy stuff about many of the nations around Israel. So we'll go into some of that. We'll close out that study with a section on also in the words of Jesus. And we're going to get into some prophecy stuff that Jesus went through in John 14 through 17 on the night before, or the night that he was arrested. Okay? So in study 6, we will actually finally get to the book of Revelation. Except we're going to break it down a little bit differently than just going through it straightforward. So the way we're going to break this study apart about Revelation, we will have an introduction to an overview of Revelation, and we'll use Revelation chapter 1 as our basis. We have already, at that point, we'll have went through chapters 2 and 3, so we're going to skip over to Revelation 4 and 5. And we're going to talk about the rapture and heaven. And we're going to give you a picture of these things that may be surprising to some people. We think we know what heaven is like. Maybe we do and maybe we don't. So I want to give you some things to think about and to challenge you on some things, all right? On some ideas, that is. Then we'll, instead of just going through the rest of the book straight, what I want to do is group together the chapters that are talking about the judgments and the tribulation. So we'll go through Revelation 6 through 8, and then it breaks into, there's a piece that breaks out a little bit. Then, actually, let me rephrase this. We'll go through 6 and part of 7, jump over to 8, then 8 through 11, jump over to 15 and 16. Then we're going to come back, and if you understand how the book of Revelation is created, with some break points in there, in between the judgments, we'll come back and talk about the witnesses there, the 144,000 and the 2 witnesses, and that's Revelation 7 and 10 and 14. Then we're going to talk about the Antichrist and company. So Revelation 12 through 13, 17 and 18. We'll also look into Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, talking about the Antichrist and all of his minions. And then finally, we'll talk about the return of the King and the last days. That's Revelation 19 through 22. And then I'm excited to put together the charts for a study that is going to be different than anything I've taught before. And in study 7, I'm calling it Messiah the King. So I have no outline yet, but what I want to do, so there's all sorts of, what's the word I'm looking for? Bible apologetics. Matter of fact, I have some studies out there talking about is it real, where I go into Bible apologetics, at least to some level. That's what most people do, and they go and show Old Testament says this is the prophecy about Jesus, and New Testament, here's where it's fulfilled. I want to take it a little bit different approach, because what I really want to do is I want to focus on using the, as Christians would say, the Old Testament, as the Jewish people would say, the Tanakh, to prove who the Messiah really is. So this is going to be focusing on the Tanakh portion of it, to show that who the Jewish people think the Messiah is, that's not the right description. By the Tanakh tells us who the Messiah, what he really is supposed to look like, what his characteristics are. So I'm looking forward to that, and I am so hoping that I can get some of my Jewish friends to watch. And study 8, if Jesus tarries long enough for us to get this done, study 8 is going to be historic and prophetic Jewish feasts. So this gets into the feasts of Moses and other Jewish feasts and explaining how they are prophetic. So study 8 will break down into an introduction to the feasts, where we can get a high-level view. Then the spring feasts, that is Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and first fruits. Then we'll talk about the summer feast, that's Pentecost. And then we'll talk about the fall feasts, that is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And then we'll also bring in some of the other Jewish celebrations, Purim and such as that. So all of those things show us a picture of prophecy that is right there in front of, that has been in front of the Jewish people for all this time. And I'm hoping that we all see the prophetic nature of those things. So I said several times here, we're going to be digging into details. Why dig into the details? Why not stay at the high level? The details are more than just fun. They show us a side of God who is in control of every facet of our lives. If we let Him, what we're going to be showing is things that happened in the life of David that show up 600 years later on that order. In the life of Esther, that show up in the Feast of Purim. God plans these things. He knows what's going on. There's some Bible teaching out there that says, well, God is in control of every little detail, and if somebody was beaten or whatever, that was God's will. No, it wasn't. I've addressed it before in the past. I will address it more in the future, but that's not what we're talking about. But God is in control. If He put it in His Bible, He will bring it to pass. And this is what I just explained. He affected things that happened hundreds of years ago just to affect something in your life today, which in turn will affect somebody else in the future. I'm going to give you, here's a rabbit trail, okay? So, I was born again on September 5th, 1979, listening to the preaching and the altar call, quote, altar call, for stay in your seat kind of altar call, by a man named Bill Basansky. Bill Basansky has a number of books out there, and one of those books, he explains how God performed miracle after miracle to get him out of the Ukraine in World War II. They were being attacked by both sides, both by the Russians and the Germans. And God gets him miracle after miracle to get him out of there, to eventually get him to the United States, to get him born again, so that God can get me born again. God took him through all of those miracles just to reach Bob Clark. I find that awesome. You may look at it differently. That is the way that I look at it. So, when we dig into details, we find out God really is in control. So, background and details and history and all these words that I've been saying sounds boring. Okay, so background and details and history, or how to have fun studying Bible prophecy. So, I'm going to give you a warning that some of these lessons may not be rousingly exhilarating, but some of them will be. So, if you can hang through what seems boring at the time, I promise you, you will be challenged and you will have fun in learning Bible prophecy, even if you've studied Bible prophecy for years. So why include the boring then? That's a good question. What we find out is there's a lot of details and history that it takes to create proper foundations. Without a good grasp of key elements of history, especially history of Israel and the church and the empires like the Roman Empire, it's difficult to understand the purpose behind or the connections to future events. So that's why we go through the boring. We'll go into significant depth in many areas. The fun is often in the details and connections between various events and passages in the Bible. The key we're going to find out is often in the precision. We're going to find out that God is a precise God in how He does things. So, my goal as I'm teaching this is to break the complex down into simple ideas. And it's often is going to be picking a piece from here and a piece from here and putting them together, and a piece from another place and putting them all together, and then be able to break them all down into something simple that is easy to understand. So whether you know a little or a lot about the Bible prophecy, I believe you're going to learn. All right? If you know little, you'll learn a lot. If you know a lot, I think you'll be challenged on some ideas that you've never heard before, and help to open up what you believe. So here's a boredom warning up front about the next few lessons. All right, they're not going to be as exciting as some of those later, but they're included, number one, for the sake of completeness. But number two, some people do need to watch these lessons. So starting with the next lesson, we'll be talking about why study Bible prophecy. If you're already convinced you are thrilled about Bible prophecy, it's okay to skip that lesson. But if you're not sure, you're sort of leery of Bible prophecy, it's a turnoff, I'm going to challenge you to watch that lesson and see if you want to go on with us in these set of studies. Because there's a reason for it, for everybody. All right? And then we'll talk about what is Bible prophecy, so you may understand it. If you don't, watch these lessons. And then we'll go into Bible prophecy versus Nostradamus and psychics and such as that. Some of you may not care whatsoever about that, although there's some interesting pieces of that for even those who know a lot about Bible prophecy and who understand the Nostradamus side of things. So we'll get into some challenging things even there. But if you watch, the History Channel or whatever, and you see things about Nostradamus and other psychics, and you think that's exciting, and you've heard, oh, they are predicting the future. Watch that lesson. Okay? Then after that, we will talk about some stuff that a lot of people would find boring, but it's laying groundwork that is important as we go forward. So we'll talk about principles to understanding Revelation, the book of Revelation, as well as Bible prophecy revelation. We'll talk about key terms so that we're all on the same footing. We understand what the tribulation is and the Antichrist and such as that. Differing interpretive approaches. Now, if you're like me, every Bible prophecy book I open has almost the same thing, section on the differing interpretive approaches. If you're very, very familiar with that, it's okay if you skip, if you know what you believe and why you believe it. If you're not sure and you want to explore more, watch that lesson. I think it'll be good. So I wanted to add into this intro lesson this section on key teachers and sources and resources that I have used through this study. So if you can see the screen, here are key teachers that have impacted my views of Bible prophecy. So this is almost at least for some of it, is in an order of how much they've affected my views. So Chuck Missler, absolutely, I recommend him to anybody. Do I agree with him on everything? I don't agree with any of these people on everything. I don't agree with myself on everything, okay? But there is so much that I have learned watching Chuck Missler videos on YouTube, and you can order things online from Koinonia House. There's also Clarence Larkin was a preacher who wrote a number of prophecy-type books in the early 1900s, has fantastic insight into a lot of this stuff. Alan Nolan is a preacher up in Oklahoma that I have heard a whole bunch recently. He had, let's see here, I think it was like almost 70 sermons or teaching lessons on the book of Revelation. He had 99 on the book of Genesis. He had more than 20 on the Olivet Discourse. He goes into a lot of detail. I've learned a lot from him. Charles Capps. You may know Charles Capps as a faith teacher, but he also, in the last decade or two of his life, went a lot into Bible prophecy. So he has some prophecy books out there. David Jeremiah. Dr. David Jeremiah has taught prophecy ever since I've ever known him, which I started listening to him in 1985 and have always loved his teaching. Pastor Jack Hayford, who's passed on now. By the way, if in these charts, if you can't tell, some of the names are in red. Those are people who have passed on at this point. Jack Hayford has passed on last year or the year before. So some of his teaching on the book of Revelation, I have the tapes where he taught it many years ago. I think it was probably in 1985 that he taught it. Hilton Sutton has passed away a number of years. He taught Bible prophecy for, it seems like centuries. but at least decades. Billy Brim gets a lot into Bible prophecy and the Jewish connection. Walid Shubat is where I'm getting a lot of this stuff to tie back in with Islam. I'll get into that later. Hal Lindsey. Oh, I should have put... Hal Lindsey just passed away a week or two ago. So he's now passed away. Late Great Planet Earth. That is what started a lot of buzz in the Christian church and in the world about Bible prophecy. J.G. Hall. I ran across some books by him, and excellent set of books that he put out. Sir Robert Anderson has influenced probably every person on this list. He went through and showed how, he went through the book of Daniel and showed in the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel how Daniel was given a prophecy that to the day declared the day that Jesus would ride into Jerusalem on the donkey. To the day. And it's really cool. Pastor March Hitchcock. Ken Johnson. Ken Johnson he teaches a lot about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So he's fascinating to listen to. Larry Ollison, Rick Renner, many, many, many others. So here's just a few. I got 2 charts of this. Here's some of the prophecy books in my library. Some of these books are excellent, others not so much, but I included them to show you there are so many books out there. Here's the second chart. I have not read through all of these, but I have read through a lot of them, and I've read through pieces of most of them. As we go through this study, I will be flipping back and forth through many different Bible versions so that we can get the ideas across in a simple fashion. All right? So I will almost always go back to the New King James as my basis for everything. But we're going to use, when we get into the actual prophecy scripture, we're going to be using, to a large extent, the literal translation of the Holy Bible, the LITV, copyright 1976 and 2000 by J.P. Green Sr. So I'm looking around the room to see if I have it in here. I have a big, thick, black volume that is an interlinear Bible. And in that interlinear Bible, they have a literal translation right beside the interlinear part, the Hebrew and the Greek. And this is the version of the Bible that they include in that book. We'll also use New Living Translation, especially if we're talking about the story parts of things, of what we're going through. Go back to the original King James Version for a few things. The Literal Standard Version, which is, if you don't know, the Literal Standard Version is sort of a modernized version of Young's literal version. So Young's literal version, he still used some of the King James Version language. And the Literal Standard Version, they just updated some of the language. The NIV, the New International Version, okay? We'll also, at times, I haven't put it in a chart yet, but I often do in teaching things. The Apostolic Bible Polyglot with Strong's Numbers, that's an interlinear version is all that's really saying. And so I will at times use that interlinear version. So that gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. As I said, I'm going to reiterate it here. The way that we're going to be teaching is with a real millennium, and we're going to be we're going to be teaching from the perspective of a pre-millennium, pre-tribulation rapture of the church. I use the words very carefully there. Rapture of the church, okay, as premillennial. If you have questions on that, if you don't believe that, come along with us. Or if you do believe it, come along with us and see what you can learn. Find arguments against me on some of this stuff. That's okay, but know what you believe and why you believe it. And use not your opinion, but the Bible as your basis. All right? So next time we'll talk about why study Bible prophecy. And we're going to address some of your fears. Because there's a lot of people that they don't want to study Bible prophecy because they're afraid. It's like, I'm young. I want to have a life first. I want to get married or have a girlfriend or get married or have kids or have grandkids. We'll address some of that right up front. All right? So come with us next time. And we hope to see you next time here on Passing the Torch. So long.